All right, good morning, Master Gardeners. We would like to call the meeting to order at 11:30 today. A few reminders before we begin. Everybody is muted with their video turned off. That is to conserve bandwidth and enhance the performance of Zoom. The meeting is being recorded and a link will be forwarded to everyone in VMS. The chat feature is available to ask questions or make comments. So feel free to participate there. We have Joellen who will be monitoring the chat to answer participants' questions or comments or get any additional feedback from the speaker. And for best viewing, use the view speaker feature or active speaker option for Mac versus the all participants or gallery options. So without further ado, we have 55 participants that we're starting off with, and I will turn it over to our Dallas County Master Gardener Association President, Miss Abby.
Well, good morning, Jessica. Thank you very much for that. I would like to welcome everybody to the June monthly meeting of the Dallas County Master Gardener Association. Today, Adam Black will be speaking on underutilized Texas native plants. Adam is a lifelong plant enthusiast with a passion for the rare, unusual, and esoteric. Combining his experience in the field of botany and horticulture by promoting diverse landscapes and collaborating with various gardens and universities to collect imperiled plant species for research and conservation. He is currently self-employed as a botanical horticultural consultant, while also serving as program coordinator for the Smithsonian-led Global Genome Interactive Initiative for Gardens. Try saying that fast all at once. Global Genome Initiative. He previously worked at several botanical gardens, most notably as director of the John Ferry Garden, formerly Peckerwood Garden in Hempstead, Texas, where he helped transition this internationally acclaimed private garden into a public garden. Originally from Florida, he has managed the forest pathology and forest entomology laboratories at the University of Florida and owned a collector-oriented mail order nursery that introduced many new plants now preserved in botanical collections. So at this time, I would like to welcome Adam Black to go ahead and log in and get us started with underutilized Texas native plants.
Yeah, well, thank you all for having me. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Okay. Get rid of that. I can't see my thing there. Okay, you all see that? Everything showing up okay? All right, well, thank you all for having me. Yeah, it was kind of a long bio for me there, but when it comes down to it, I'm just an all-around plant nerd. I like traveling around the state and around the world, actually, just finding interesting things and bringing them into cultivation, growing them myself, but also getting them around to various folks from botanic gardens to just home growers who want to grow these sorts of things. I do feel that I think a lot of the conservation directions are more for getting things backed up in botanic gardens, but I think having things in home collections is one of the best things that can be done in terms of conservation, whereas while allowing you to enjoy some unusual stuff in your garden there. I've learned that botanical garden collections come and go, whereas true plant nerds who like growing interesting things, they will keep them going and they will share them around further. So that's definitely one of the more stable forms of conservation beyond these botanic collections at institutes. So I think we kind of went over that slide there, but yeah, basically I get to travel around all sorts of really beautiful places. This is the Davis Mountains in West Texas, and do things like conserve things that aren't necessarily really pretty or anything, not always necessarily flowering plants, but somebody's got to care about them. This oak here is just a little tiny scrubby oak. You can see on the right there, this was taken in winter after it got blasted by some cold there, and looks pretty ungainly, but you can see the leaves on the left here during the warmer months. This oak only exists in the United States in one little like 3-acre tract of land on top of Mount Livermore in the Davis Mountains, and then otherwise there's a few populations in Mexico. So this is obviously the easiest one for us to kind of back up here. I mean, if some disease comes in or severe fire comes through, I mean, this thing will be gone. So we like to get these things preserved at other places. And even though I think a lot of gardeners tend to focus on kind of showy things, there are a lot of collectors of things like rare oaks and things like that that just really enjoy having these unusual things in their garden there too. So we do get these around to private folks, as I said. And then on the more showier side of things, I do a lot with native orchid conservation, and I work closely with Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania. They have just a wonderful lab set up. If you're familiar with orchid propagation, you know that seed germination on many of the species is dependent on their symbiotic fungal relationships that they have with the mycorrhizae. And so the seeds and the fungus need to be combined at an early stage in a test tube, basically in a laboratory, and babied along for a while before they're basically a plant that can be removed from the laboratory setting and grown outside or in a pot. So they're really good at Longwood with basically initiating this whole process here, and then they further distribute to other gardens and nurseries too to get these things around. So there is some work being done with orchid conservation with some other folks in the state here, but yeah, I just a lot of them work on grants, so they're very limited with what they can do, whereas I just am always going around monitoring these populations. I'll swap pollen around and on things that otherwise aren't getting naturally pollinated, and put a lot of gas into it and not always getting fully compensated for everything I do. But again, someone's got to care about it, and one day I hope we can be growing some of these things, because some of these, even though orchids have a reputation for being hard and difficult in cultivation, I mean, you definitely don't want to transplant any of these things from the wild. Those that are grown in cultivation are actually fairly easy in many cases. Some species are definitely pickier, but other things like this orchid on the lower left here, I'll explain this one in more detail later, but I think this one has actually really good potential for being a very easy species in our gardens here. So yeah, we're beyond flowers. Of course, people like to have fall color, and I think in other areas of the country, people don't really focus too much on, well, in other areas of the country, people do like to consider fall color in their landscapes, but I think in Texas, it's just one of those things that's not focused on enough. I mean, we do have options, and these are the big tooth maples that are in the hill country out into West Texas and beyond. And these are around in cultivation, of course, and there are some in the Dallas area, but we've kind of learned from the different populations around the state that some populations are better suited to like the Dallas area or the Houston area, and you can't just go out and just buy a generic big tooth maple and expect it to thrive in your conditions. You need to kind of know from which population it came from if you want to succeed. So that's just one of those shortfalls in the nursery trade there, where nobody really looks for the suitable genetics for the different regions. And there's other species too that can offer fall color that I think could be used a bit more in our landscapes, but nobody really focuses on it. And just to point out too, in the background there, that tree that's rising up in the back center there, silhouetted against the sky there, that's Arizona cypress. A lot of people don't even realize that Arizona cypress is native to a few canyons out in Big Bend National Park there. And so if you do grow that, that is a native species, even though a lot of the ones in cultivation actually do originate from Arizona and New Mexico and Mexico. But that's something I'd like to get around more too, or the Texas provenance trees. They obviously look pretty ratty when they get to that size, but when they're smaller, they are quite beautiful. So, and speaking about native plants, I mean, there's all sorts of different philosophies with this. I gave this talk also to the Native Plant Society of Texas, North Central chapter. And a lot of the native plant societies are more focused lately on growing local source things, just things that have things that do or historically were found in their immediate vicinity, rather than just looking broadly at things found within the political boundaries of Texas. And a lot of that's from an ecological perspective in terms of just being able to create a biodiverse landscape that's catering to all the birds and the insects and all the forms of life that are native to that area as well, that are dependent on these plants. And it's a good thing if you're doing like restoration, of course, to use local source things when possible. But I think some people have the idea that or some people promote it as bad to grow things from other ecoregions or just other regions within the state, which I don't think is necessarily the case. I've heard of people sometimes fear that if you take one plant from West Texas and grow it in East Texas, it may cross-pollinate with a relative that naturally occurs here and then dilute the genetics and create a freak that takes over the world, which is highly unlikely. I mean, there are cases where things like that have happened, not take over the world, but at least they do infiltrate the native populations, and they are not necessarily as pure as they once were. But I don't think a few exceptions to the rule kind of negates us from growing things, when most of the time things like that are not going to happen. And so yeah, there's just different ways of looking at it. And I grow plenty of exotic plants too that aren't even from the United States. I've been collecting plants in Taiwan and various other areas that have similar climates to the Gulf coastal states. And there's definitely nothing wrong with including exotics in your landscape too. But if you want purely natives, that's totally fine too. Just don't let different philosophies influence you necessarily. I mean, obviously we don't want to be growing the next weed that's going to become the next noxious invasive, and we need to monitor any exotic plants that we bring into our gardens. But that does not mean that we shouldn't grow non-natives here. And then kind of blurring the lines of the last point here, growing things that are more not really paying attention to political boundaries, but more the ecoregions or just the habitats, the things that are adaptable to our area. Some of you may have heard of Lynn Lowry, who was just a really, he was just one of those first true Texas plantsmen who was really just promoting diverse landscapes, really bringing a lot of really interesting native Texas plants in cultivation. But he collected a lot in Northeast Mexico too, and really introduced a lot of great things. If any are growing like Monterey oaks, I mean, those all go back to basically his collections for the most part. And There's a number of other plants in our gardens that all originate from him. And he liked to look at things more from the ecoregion as opposed to the political boundaries, because he was saying that a lot of these northeastern Mexican plants were just perfectly adaptable. They were growing in very similar conditions, similar habitats that are down in just right across the river in Mexico. And in some cases, plants that some folks were just considering non-native, in other words, including several miles south of the border, later on people would actually find them as being native in Texas somewhere. So, I mean, you can't really just go by this arbitrary line that was drawn between a region and say it's native if it's on this side of the line and not if it's on the other side. So, and plants are always moving around. I mean, just because plants are here today doesn't mean they were hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago. There's just always shifts in where these things are growing, and some things could be migrating back up and becoming more common here. So, and just, I think you all are probably familiar with the philosophies behind growing native plants here, as far as just being attracting the biodiversity and the restoration. And a lot of people do want aesthetics. They want pretty natives. I think that's one complaint a lot of people say when they hear of native gardens, is they're just too wild looking, or just not very they just want something a little bit more formal. You can do that with natives with proper selections. It's just a lot of the things that I think are commonly available just tend to either seed around a bit and naturalize and create that kind of wild look, which some people like and some people don't. And but there are things that are either like more structural, that can offer some sense of that can be used better for garden design. Either for structure or just for just varying textures and forms and things like that. So really just, I always like to just encourage thinking broadly and just thinking what you want to grow, and not being influenced by the some folks out there who just really want it only one way. There are people that hate nativars, which would be a cultivar of a native plant. This is a good example here, which is a gold leaf live oak, which I always had mixed feelings about this. I'm not really into really gaudy plants here like this, but still I see value in this. And this has a long history. This goes back to a nursery in Louisiana that found this golden live oak and started propagating it. And they were offering it for a ridiculous amount of money, like $500 per plant, and very few people actually bought it. So it eventually just kind of fizzled out. The nursery went out of business, the owner died, and there were only a few plants that were remaining in cultivation. And I really like to preserve these things that are just on the brink of being lost, these plant selections. So the tree on the right there was actually in a garden in Georgia. And I was making trips every year when I lived in Florida up to this woman's house. She was very nice to let me raid her tree every year for cuttings, just to try to get this going. It took forever to finally get some grafts to take. It's not very easy to root via cuttings and seeds. It doesn't, the gold feature doesn't come true via seed. So it's all vegetative propagation. But finally got some going, and it's up at Stephen F. Austin University too, and David Creech up there has been propagating it as well. And it's nothing that's, even though it's a really spectacular tree, a really stand out in the landscape, it's not something that I think is ever going to be kind of like a mainstream plant where we're going to see our roads lined with it or anything like that, because it does have its propagation limitations. But I definitely think if you need an exclamation point in your property, it's definitely worth having and worth getting out there in the trade. Then there's things that are just all around good plants, like this Tephrosia lindheimeri. This is from South Texas, but I know it does well up in the Dallas areas and points beyond. It's very hardy. It does die back to underground, kind of thick woody rootstock, and by late spring it spreads out. It just forms like this just really kind of tidy clump of short vines here that are have these really nice kind of silvery blue, dusty blue leaves, and then these magenta flowers on them just all throughout the growing season. And I've just been so impressed by this plant because once it's established, you can just basically forget about it. Through the worst droughts, it just will always look good. I wasn't here in the 2011 drought, but the plantings that were at the John Ferry Garden before I started there, they said that that was just the one thing that just never flinched at all, was the Tephrosia lindheimeri. Through all the heat, through the lack of rain, it was in an area where they never irrigated, and they just they were doing supplemental irrigation, but they wanted to just, since it was just always looking good, they just wanted to see how long it would go, and it just kept on trucking along. So to me, that says a lot about this plant, and it's really great at suppressing weeds too. So it makes like a 4-foot diameter patch. You could plant kind of a mass of these if you want to have a ground cover, just out full blasting sun and the worst quality soil. It'll just be totally happy and look great.
Hey, Adam, it's Joellen. Did it do well in the freeze?
Yeah, it did fine. Again, it is deciduous, so it dies back to the ground every year naturally, even when it doesn't experience freezes. So it will disappear in the landscape during the winter time, and it has that really thick underground rootstock there that's basically insulated by the soil through the freezes. So yeah, it seems pretty impervious to cold. There's another photo with the detail of the pea-like flowers. And then another thing that's not really on a lot of people's radar, this is something that's found throughout East Texas, and usually limited to very sandy areas, even though it doesn't need deep, loose, sandy soil in cultivation. This Polygonella americana. It's just a really beautiful, just small shrub that is just another one of those things. Once it's established, you can forget about it. It naturally grows in these really dry, very well drained, sterile sands. And this is one that's actually at the John Ferry Garden here, and it's planted in one of the perennial beds, and just even though it naturally grows in very acidic soil, here it's growing in slightly alkaline soil, doing great, and tends to have really nice, I was trying to look for my better pictures, I couldn't find them at the time here, but this one, they just tend to have really nice kind of bluish green foliage. The white clouds of flowers on there with the little pink accents are present on the plant all throughout the warmer months, and just another bulletproof plant. Buccia linifolia. Again, these pictures don't really do it justice. There's some really nice ones at the Texas Discovery Garden if you go there, and some of their plantings. Another thing you can just plant and forget, and it's a relative of the Ruellias that many of you are probably familiar with. This species is actually from like the Western Hill Country out into West Texas and down into Mexico, and definitely has a kind of finer texture to it. The plants do get a lot larger than these here. Again, I can never find all my good photos when I want to for presentations, but it'll make a nice like 2 foot tall by 2 foot wide massive upright stems, just each of them covered daily with these little purple flowers on it. And it's just another thing that thrives on neglect. This one, it actually does better in really sterile soils, as opposed to anything enriched with compost or anything like that. It naturally just grows out of cracks and rocks, so it just kind of shows you what it wants. It wants just really good drainage, it likes baking hot sun, and just a really good plant for a challenging area of the garden. Going back to Tephrosia, I should have had this behind that first one. I said the Tephrosia lindheimeri. This is Potosina from Mexico, mostly Mexico, but there are a few populations of this that have been discovered in Texas. One of them we actually lost due to road widening this past year, but there's two other little limited populations within the state. But another one that is just another very bulletproof plant that makes a nice little ground cover. And this one's a little bit different than the last one. It has these kind of vertical spikes of flowers that are a little bit more of a kind of lavender color, I guess, kind of pale pink. So a little bit different effect than the last one. Amarexia wrightii. I think the common name on this was yellow show. I use a lot of Latin names. I apologize for that. Some of these things just don't really have common names. We need to make something up and make them more common so we can speak about them more a little easier. But this is one that's actually pretty easy in cultivation. It's native from like the southern hill country wrapping down into South Texas and into Mexico. These photos here were taken along a road down in Uvalde County, outside of Sabinal. And in the wild, at least, with some good spring rains or fall rains, they will just seasonally respond by just popping up out of the ground and blooming like crazy. Each of these flowers only lasts a day, though. But there's always several buds in succession. So every day you'll have a new flower for a period of time. In cultivation, if it's getting regular irrigation, it'll definitely flower most of the summertime. Has those, you can see in the lower photo there, the leaves has some really attractive foliage too. It does die back to a kind of a tuberous rootstock in the winter time, so it does disappear, but just a really stunning plant that's, I think, when people would see this at the John Ferry Garden, this was one of our most requested plants. We could just never keep it in stock. It's very easy from seed, though. It's just they would just sell out very quickly. Someone really needs to do these on a larger scale. And then the Mahonias. You all might be familiar with the one Mahonia trifoliolata that is very common throughout Central and West Texas, but we do have this rare species here that's found in a few locations west of Austin and into the region kind of northwest of San Antonio. And this one's a little bit different, and it has more leaflets per leaf. Has a little bit more of a turquoise colored leaves too. It doesn't really show up here. And in the wintertime, you can see on the right here, the leaves will, after some chilling, they'll take on a really nice red coloration to them, which the other Mahonia doesn't do. The photo on the right here is also with the leaves encased in ice, but it is quite attractive when
not much longer at all. Go home.
When it's a less dreary day and the sun is hitting that red, it just really glows a really beautiful color in the landscape. And the added bonus about this species compared with our common native is the flowers are extremely fragrant, and the blooming period is fairly short, unfortunately, in spring, but the fragrance is just really potent. You don't need to stick your nose down in it. You can be just near the plant, and really nicely blooming plant will definitely perfume the air very nicely. And then more for textural plants. This plant, basically, and taking up the right half of the screen here, is actually an ash tree. It doesn't look like most ashes that you might be familiar with, and that it's got very tiny leaves, and it's evergreen. It's not deciduous like nearly all other ash species. But oops, I thought I had another photo of it, but it's just basically another bulletproof plant that you can plant and forget. It's from the droughty regions of West Texas, grown along washes, but it does great in normal conditions as well. Weeping juniper here. This is another one of those Mexican plants that barely gets up into Texas, but seems pretty adaptable throughout the state, as long as you give it just full sun and well draining soil, good air circulation. Has kind of a unusual look. These in the wild here are obviously shaped by the environment, but in cultivation under better conditions, they'll have a nice straight stem and with some nice horizontal branches, and all the foliage will just be hanging, drooping down kind of interestingly there. Some people think it kind of has a spooky look to it. Others find it attractive and interesting structural and textural feature in the garden here. It's not grown very often. There's few plants in cultivation that are providing seed. Most of the plants here are in the national park, Big Bend National Park, so collecting there is prohibited. So I've been collecting this under permit just to get it into cultivation a little bit more here. And I also found a gold leaf form of this too, so hopefully something we can get around in the future. Then another weird thing from South Texas, barely gets across the border. It's Mortonia greggii, and there's only a couple of populations of this, a very rare plant down there. But the foliage just kind of reminds me of like a bottle brush or something like that. The flowers definitely don't, but it's and the bark has these kind of weird orange patchiness to it. It's a very upright plant. It's hard to get a good photo of, but just to really show its attractive features. But I just really like the texture it offers, and just the vertical how it basically can be used as a vertical accent in the garden. And then the more flowery things, some of you are familiar with some of our native penstemons that are around. This is one that definitely needs to get around a lot more. This one's naturally restricted to areas that have just really deep, loose, sandy soil in the eastern third of Texas. But it's adaptable in cultivation as long as it has good drainage. If it's grown in richer soil, these very tall flower spikes tend to flop over. But if they're grown a little bit drier, which is, I think, easier than wetter in most cases here in Texas, just a really nice sun-baked condition, which a lot of plants don't like. This one thrives in. Has those really unusual, just kind of eucalyptus-like leaves that completely encircle the stems there, with the flowers that emerge from it. Just a very interesting plant. These things will get about, these flower spikes will get about 6 feet tall in some really healthy plants. And the red, it's just difficult to capture in the photos here, but it's just a really intense scarlet red. Hummingbirds love it. And hummingbirds love this one too. This is Bouvardia ternifolia. This is from West Texas, but is adaptable in most areas of Texas as well. It tends to grow in kind of the mountainous, rocky soils here, but will adapt to richer soils as long as there's good drainage. And another one of those just flower intensities. It's difficult to capture. It's just a bright reddish orange color. In the wild, these things are just always swarming with hummingbirds and butterflies and all sorts of pollinators. Really tend to be attracted to them. So, and it's just another one of those things that's just not common enough in cultivation. I found a white form of this too, which I'm starting to root cuttings of, but which is interesting in itself, but definitely not as intense orange as these. Okay, yeah, there's the white form that I found. And then ornamental onions. I mean, you all are probably familiar with some of the native onions around that just tend to be kind of weedy, but still attractive. This was a selection that, if y'all ever heard of the former Yuckadoo nursery that closed down several years ago, they were just a really popular collector nursery, offering both Mexican and native Texas plants from the late 80s and the 90s and early 2000s. This was a selection of Allium drummondii, just one of our common onions that they found up in the College Station area that just had these really dark purple flowers. And it was just extremely vigorous too. Just one plant would multiply into a really nice clump. You can see the foliage back there, which has this kind of a delightful tangled texture to it. Just makes a really neat, just kind of someone described it as attractively messy. It just makes just a nice rich mat there, just covered with these purple flowers here, and just a neat little accent in a dry garden. It prospers in real dry conditions. Plant that I really like. It doesn't really have showy flowers, but it's got an interesting look to it, and makes a nice little winter ground cover. This is a winter growing plant. This is Thalictrum texanum. This is a fairly rare plant, only found in the lower Brazos River Valley. And I think there's only like 14 or 15 known sites for this. I found a few more recently. I think it's just one of those things that's inconspicuous, and a lot of people just don't really go looking for it. But either way, it's a conservation concern, and I think it is kind of attractive. I mean, to me, it kind of has a similar texture to like a maidenhair fern or something like that. Much easier than a maidenhair fern, though, in the garden. It just will make this nice mat of foliage, and those little flowers there, they're just held on these little horizontally jutting flower spikes. But great for like a partially shaded woodland garden, or just anywhere you need a little ground cover there. And then there's another species, Thalictrum dasycarpum. This is more common in the northern states. It ranges all the way up into Canada. But we do have a few populations, southernmost populations of it here in Texas, going all the way down to a few places like west of Houston. And on the left there, I mean, that's basically what the foliage looks like in the wintertime. It just is a low clump. It would just always get mistaken for a maidenhair fern. Totally evergreen, doesn't die back. But then in spring, on the right-hand side, you can see it sends up these flower spikes that have these little spaced out whorls of foliage. But the stems on many of the selections are that really nice kind of jet black color you can see there, just a really striking feature. And then when they flower, again, none of these meadow-roos are very showy, but they're still interesting. They have these little, up close, they have these little tassel-y flowers here that in mass can look quite attractive. I really like them for just their appearance in the wintertime after they're done flowering. When not much else is just really rich and green looking. Some of you are probably familiar with the native red buckeyes, and there's a lot of room for selection for some really good forms of this among our native populations. There's a lot of variation in this, and but it's just one of those trees that no garden should be without. It's very tolerant of most soils. It likes a little bit more irrigation than some things, but naturally grows in kind of floodplains. But it doesn't. It can definitely tolerate drier conditions as long as it has supplemental water during the droughty times. But great for wildlife. A lot of people don't know about our native variety of that same species that lives in the southern hill country. So same species, just a different pale yellow flowering variety flavescens. And this grows very differently. It grows in these dry, rocky canyons on the limestone that periodically get some water rushing through after the rains, but then it just dries up and they're just baking in the sun again. So it's even more adaptable, and just kind of like the just the interesting color on these buckeyes here. And at the John Ferry Garden, we grew both of them, and they would oftentimes just cross on their own, and we get these weird hybrids popping up where you get these crosses between the red form and the yellow form, and you get kind of these bicolor flowers. You get some orangey ones, and So I was always having fun with these, just making selections with just for color. Some of you may grow spider lilies. Most species tend to be swamp dwelling ones and require a lot of water. A lot of people don't know about this one here, which is a native in East Texas, Western Louisiana, up into southwestern Arkansas. This is like one of the few species of spider lilies that actually grows on high, dry, usually on just kind of well-drained slopes, oftentimes in full blasting sun. And you can see the foliage too isn't that normal dark green like most of the swamp dwelling spider lilies. It has that kind of bluish color to it. These at the John Ferry Garden are never watered at all, and they just always look good. They never wilt, really stiff foliage. But this one's interesting in that so it'll emerge, it'll die down during the winter. It'll emerge from dormancy in late winter and look like this until about maybe June or so, probably about right now. They'll start feeling the effects of summer, and they'll just basically want to go dormant. But then late August, suddenly, sometimes into as early as late July, but usually mid to late August, suddenly those plants that went dormant in June will be sending up these flower spikes from the ground, no leaves or anything, and then they'll just be blooming, just a bunch of basically spider lily flower spikes sticking up out of the ground with no foliage, kind of like the surprise lilies or hurricane lilies, as people call them, the lycoris that some of you might be familiar with. I never knew this before I moved to Texas. I just thought this was the neatest spider lily, and the fact that it's just totally drought tolerant too just adds to its appeal. So yeah, I've just always been very fond of this plant here and think that this really should be grown a lot more. Malochia tomentosa, this is another South Texas plant, but it's proving quite adaptable in most areas of the state. It does freeze back during the winter time, but even if it didn't freeze back, I would recommend cutting it basically back to the ground anyway and just let it rejuvenate every year. I think it makes for a much more attractive plant. In places like South Texas, it can turn into a large shrub where it's happy, but they tend to be kind of make long and lanky branches if they're growing multiple seasons. So I just like them to be cut back either by the freeze or by pruners and let them turn into just kind of a low, dense multi-stem shrub. These things are constantly in flower from mid to late spring when they return from the ground all the way into the first frost that kills them back. The foliage just has, in most cases, has that really nice kind of dusty blue-gray color to it, which I think is really attractive. But I've been exploring a lot of the populations of this down South Texas, and there's tremendous variation. There's some really nice rich green leaf forms. I've found some white flowered forms. There's different intensities of this kind of rose-colored to magenta-colored. So I've been looking for some good forms of this to make better selections of. But another plant that thrives on a fair amount of neglect. It likes some water during the really dry times, but it's not something you really need to be babying along here. So there's a few nurseries, at least in the Houston area here, that are carrying this, and I hope that it develops more popularity as we go on. And some people are interested in kind of lawn alternatives. You don't have to have a St. Augustine grass or other types of grasses that just require a ton of maintenance and a lot of water during the dry times. And carex lawns or sedge lawns have become popular in places like California and other areas, but people are really just starting to really investigate what can be used really in Texas. There's a few folks like in the Austin area, like Pat McNeil and a few others that have been promoting sedges for lawns, and there's a variety of options I think are working really well. This one here is one that I found up near Athens, Texas, just growing in the woods here. And I'm pretty sure that this naturally occurring clump here is all one plant that just basically just multiplied and just keeps spreading. It's just very consistent, which I identified it as this Carex albicans, which normally doesn't make such a nice, consistent, broad mat. But I mean, it will spread, but this I thought was just a really great selection. And my dog thought so too here. So I collected a bunch of this, and I've been kind of bulking this up here to really try it more in the landscape and see if it will make a similar effect here. This was very deep shade, so that's a lot of people are always looking for something that can create a nice consistent lawn in the shadier conditions. And so this particular selection might have some great potential for that. And then we get to this amorphokinescence. This, I put a question mark there because I question if this really is amorphokinescence, even though botanists have called our Texas populations this. The true amorphokinescence, or at least what I consider the true amorphokinescence, is basically more of a central to northern plains plant getting up into like the Great Lakes region, and looks very different than our central to East Texas plants. The populations I know of this are kind of like out near Bastrop. There's a few like in deep East Texas, out in like the Sabine National Forest, all growing in kind of prairie remnants, or just what were kind of understory and some pinelands. But whatever it is, I mean, it's just that flower, that electric blue purple color is just really striking to me. And these are some wild plants where they're kind of ungainly and tall and lanky, but in cultivation it will be more multi-stemmed and lower and compact, and will bloom even heavier than these plants that I photographed here in the wild. So yeah, just a really cool plant. And we've got another species of Amorpha from this one's and actually a fairly rare one from the hill country, but it's just more of an oddity than anything. It just has these really interesting black and white flowers here that butterflies seem to really love this one too. So I just planted one of these in a butterfly garden I redid at Rice University campus in Houston, and they were already coming to it. Some of you might be familiar with one of our native blanket flowers, the Gaillardia estivalis. This is a little bit different than the red and orange ones that you see everywhere along the roadsides throughout the state. This one tends to naturally grow in just more open, sandy areas. And it's quite variable. There's a lot of named varieties in the wild. Many of them will have kind of like the yellow petal-like rays, and then we'll have a darker, like purplish to rusty color center. But occasionally see some solid yellow ones like this. This was a selection that was found out in Lee County near Giddings, by Wade Roich, formerly the nursery manager at the Yuckadoo Nursery that I mentioned earlier. And this particular selection is really distinctive, and I really want to look at it a little bit more closely, just because it is so different than all other Gaillardia estivalis. It could even be a new species, I don't know. But you can see on the right hand side, that's basically two plants that were planted in North Carolina there at Plant Delights Nursery, if you're familiar with them. And it just makes a really nice, tight, ever-blooming clump. It is evergreen in the wintertime. It doesn't die back and get all ugly like our other Gaillardias or our annual species. And it is just a really spectacular plant that needs to be used a lot more. And so, yeah, Plant Delights in North Carolina is the only one that's really propagating this right now, but we need to actually get some Texas nurseries propagating it, since it's a Texas plant. Plant Delight put the name Glitz and Glamour on it as the cultivar name, but yeah, I've been really fond of this one here. And then another Gaillardia that a lot of people don't know about. This is a federally endangered one from a few sites in East Texas on deep sandy soil, Gaillardia estivalis variety Winkleri. And this one is highly variable too. It'll be this kind of purple color. It can be the white with yellow centers like on the left there. You can get some kind of pink forms. The plant itself, as you can see in the right-hand photo, is beyond the flowers. It can be a little bit rangy in the wild, but slightly more attractive in cultivation. But it's more of just a rarity that's just good to conserve in cultivation and then enjoy it for the flowers there. You all might be familiar with some of the native salvias. This is one that's not really on many people's radars. This one grows in the really dry, hot areas of like the Permian Basin and down into the very western edge of the hill country into the Trans-Pecos region. And oftentimes out there, it'll only really come up out of the ground if they get sufficient rains that year. Otherwise, they'll just kind of stay kind of semi-dormant, maybe a few leaves up, but otherwise not looking like much. But so far in cultivation, this one's done pretty good, bloomed very profusely, as similar to what you see here. These were taken after a good rainfall period out in West Texas. But very interesting flowers compared with a lot of other salvias. Some people even suggested it shouldn't even be considered a salvia. It should be its own genus just because of the flower structure. You can see, especially in that upper photo there, just has a very long tubular flower, and the tip, the way it flares out, is quite different from a lot of salvias. And a friend of mine, botanist friend of mine, was actually trying to get a grant together to study the pollination of this, because nobody really knows what pollinates it, being that it has such unusual flowers. It probably has its own unique pollinator, probably a moth or something like that with a really long proboscis to get down that tube there, but nobody's ever really documented it. So it's one of those mysteries. Maybe if we grow it more, we can figure it out. And then trees, these styrax, the silver bells, which are common in, well, I wouldn't say common, but they're more often found in East Texas and throughout Eastern North America, generally don't have leaves like these styrax platinifolia. These are something almost exclusive to Central Texas and down into Mexico, with these really broad, kind of rounded leaves. These are actually from a population near Glen Rose, but very spotty in where you find them. And then there's different varieties around the state. This one, Platinifolius variety Youngye, is one from West Texas that was thought to be practically extinct until my friend Michael Eason was out on a friend's ranch near Fort Davis and suddenly found hundreds of them. So they've just been kind of there all along on a private ranch that was otherwise overgrazed by the cattle, but on these kind of steep hillsides where the cattle couldn't get, these things were just all over the place there. This one's a little bit different than the previous one, with you can see the fuzzy white undersides to the leaves there. So it's a good one to get into cultivation for conservation and just for interest. Another weird one, Croton almabensis variety texensis. Some of you might know are perennial, kind of often weedy crotons that we have around the state here. This one's actually more of a woody shrub, and it's only found a couple places near Austin and Waco. Fort Hood property has a small population of these. I just really think they're interesting plants with the silver undersides. It was hard to capture it in the photo here. It looks white, but it's actually kind of like a reflective metallic silver color. And then the flowers are interesting, nothing too showy, but it's a great semi-evergreen plant. In the mild winters, it'll stay evergreen, and the harsher winters, it'll defoliate, but it'll leaf right back out again. And what's interesting about this one is the normal Croton alabamensis, as the name implies. It's only found in one little population in Alabama and one little population in Western Georgia. And then suddenly it reappears in the area I mentioned before. There's one little subpopulation near Austin, one up in Fort Hood, and basically nothing in between. So it's just one of those plants that has a very weird distribution and very rare. And there's just other weird things with distinctive flowers. Nablus carii. This is something that's only found in a couple sites in the southern Edwards Plateau. It's actually a close relative of like some more like wild lettuces and things, but just really nice droopy flowers. And growing basically with it at a few of those sites is this Phaseolus texensis, which I thought was a really beautiful vine. If you like vines, at least in the wild, nobody's really grown this much, but in the wild, it seems like a well-behaved vine. It's not something that's going to take over your landscape or anything, just kind of a small vine with nice foliage, and then these kind of arching flower spikes with these really beautiful kind of pale pink, light purple flowers. So Michael Lisa and I both collected seeds of these. I know he's getting them going from at San Antonio Botanic Garden, and I've shared them around to a few others as well. So we'll need to play around with that. Witch hazels. A lot of people don't even know that witch hazels actually occur in Texas, but we do have the regular common eastern witch hazel into East Texas, and then there's another little isolated population out in the hill country growing in very unusual dry conditions. And I think those are the ones to use in a lot of the more harsher regions of the state, including I would consider Dallas in that regard there. And it would definitely be worth looking for some better flowering selections. For a shrub with good evergreen foliage, I think Forsteria reticulata is one that is deserving of attention. This one is naturally only found in the very southern edge of the hill country, but to my knowledge, nobody's really grown it at all. And here I found this weeping form of it out near Lakey that I got some cuttings of recently. It's kind of hard to see, but I mean, all those branches just go straight down, and it was a nice windy day. They're all just kind of flowing in the breeze there. And this was in the wild too, so usually these things in cultivation will look even better. So I'm really curious to see how this one will look. Laatris, the gay feathers, probably you're familiar with some of the native species in your area, but a lot of people don't even know there's one that has these yellow colored flower spikes. And I should say that the yellow that you're seeing here is not the actual flowers. These are actually basically the leafy bracts that are that the flowers come out of. The flowers themselves are actually kind of whitish looking. And on the right, you can see some white there, but those still are not the flowers. Those are the bracts. Basically, it'll from the top down, the whole thing will start out yellow, and then as the flowers sequentially bloom down the flower spike, those bracts will then transition to red. So some of them will get kind of that. You'll get both colors on those flower spikes there, but yeah, these bracts here are definitely much more showier than the little tiny flowers deep within those bracts there. But either way, it's just a really stout plant, very, very distinctive, and so far has proven very easy. These naturally grow in very dry, sandy conditions, so they seem to like that. What a lot of people would consider challenging conditions, as do these ferns. If any of y'all have been through some of the rockier areas in central West Texas, you've probably seen some of these unusual ferns that are growing in the rocks. Enchanted Rock, if you've been there, is a great place to see a great diversity of ferns. In fact, I think that's where I took this photo here. There are one, two, three different species of ferns in the photo here. And all these are growing in growing with cacti and other things. And it's not that these like dry conditions. These basically situate themselves, as you can see here, at the base of boulders that do tend to stay a little bit more moist and in the drier times. And if it gets really dry, these will just basically shrivel up and die back and wait for the next rains before they either unfurl again. They're actually kind of like some of the resurrection ferns, where they'll just kind of shrivel up their fronds and then get a good drenching rain and they'll just open right back up again like nothing happened. But if it's a very long dry spell, they will just totally the fronds will totally die and the roots will survive, and they'll just send up new fronds when the rains come back again. But in cultivation, these are great for rock gardens. If you want to keep them looking good, they will want at least an occasional shot of irrigation just to keep them up and keep them from naturally shriveling up. But have just all these great forms. This is another species that I just find really striking in terms of the texture of them. This one's was taken out in the Eagle Mountains in West Texas, but this one is doing good so far in my rock garden. Then Central Texas too, in the limestone, you see some of these really strange blue, basically turquoise colored xeric ferns here. Argyrocosma microphylla here. Very small, but if you want an interesting subject for kind of a rock garden setting, it's a great one. There's a number of species of Peleas, another xeric fern genus. This one here is only found in the Davis Mountains and nowhere else in the world, but it's been doing well in cultivation. Then we have weird things out there in West Texas, like this thing here, Emeria. This is something that Michael Eason actually rediscovered. It had been recorded in Black Gap Wildlife Refuge along the border out near Big Bend National Park in one spot back in, I think, the 1940s or 50s or so, and nobody had ever seen it again. And Michael, based off of very limited information, went out to try to rediscover it, and he found it. It was just basically growing in one little tiny box canyon, and didn't seem to be anywhere else in the general area. There were about 12 plants there, and that's it. So this is actually something we're working on permits on to get cuttings collected and of every single plant there, so that we can back all those up in cultivation, because again, you never know when something might happen and they're no longer there. This is actually related to Buddleia, the butterfly bushes, even though it doesn't quite look like it. We've only been able to catch a few pathetic flowers on it so far, just because it's been so dry out there in recent years. But from the old pressed herbarium specimens, it does look like it flowers more vigorously at times. So I've been really looking forward to a better show of these long tubular yellow flowers. But in the meantime, it has that interesting kind of lobed foliage. Then I told you I'd get back to these orchids here. This one here, Decromanthus cinnabarinus, this is a relative of, if y'all are familiar with the little white lady stresses orchids that are oftentimes common in lawns and other places and throughout the state. This is actually a relative of those, but it's much larger, as you can see with the swallowtail butterfly here for scale, and just clearly very, very spectacular plant. Grows out in the mountainous kind of rocky dry areas, but and it ranges down into Mexico too. But yeah, in Texas, it's only found in the Davis Mountains, the Guadalupe Mountains, and the Chisos Mountains, and probably a few of the other ranges if anybody would look a little bit further. But it's much more common down in Mexico. And there is someone down there I was talking with who is growing this as a nursery plant, and he says it's just very easy to grow. He says it's one of those things you can just stick in a landscape and it does wonderfully. The foliage on it, should have included a photo. It's actually got some attractive kind of like semi-succulent kind of aloe-like foliage on it as well. These flower spikes will get about 3 feet tall, and yeah, it's one of those things that we hope to get going. I collected seeds from some private land in the Davis Mountains last year, and Longwood Gardens has them already germinated, and literally thousands of them. And so we're really eager to get those going and trialed, and see if we can make this a staple nursery plant in Texas.
Hey, Adam, it's Joellen, and we're kind of getting shorter on time here.
Okay.
But I wanted to ask you, a lot of these are beautiful. And a lot of these, I think, what we have to research them to see if they'll work for North Texas. Are you encouraging us to try them in North Texas?
Oh, absolutely. And there's already people that are trying these things in your area there. So, and I'm always, we've got a few plant nerd friends up there I'm always sharing material with. So, so yeah, I mean, if there's anything of interest, we can always keep in touch with how these things are doing. If there's anybody who's interested in trialing some of these things, we can definitely keep in touch. Because
How do you like people to keep in touch with you?
on my last slide here, I have my email address, and
Gotcha.
I'm always posting way too many plant photos on Facebook. I'm about to finish up here, so we can go through this last
Okay,
slide if you do have
yeah.
a couple more minutes or
We
two.
got one question at the end. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say this other orchid here, the stream orchid. This is actually pretty common in certain areas of Central and West Texas, and this is something that is commonly this ranges all the way to California. And in California, this is actually a common I wouldn't say common nursery plant, but it's not difficult to find in some of the better nurseries. In fact, they even have a purple leaf selection of that species, which I've seen some native ones in Texas that are trending towards this kind of purplish color of the foliage, which I think this is just really amazing for an orchid, especially when you get those nice contrasting flowers on it. So this is another one that we're going to try to play around with here, just to see how adaptable our local Texas ones are to cultivation. And then we have these mysteries here, where this one here was recorded from Smith County, Texas, back in 1921, I believe it was, and nobody's ever seen it again after that one collection. So you can see on the range map there that where the county record where that one collection was, and where it's situated among the other eastern species and the western species there. So we've kind of put this challenge out to like the Smith County master gardeners and master naturalists to be on the lookout for this up there, but you never know where this could be growing. It likes kind of limestone seeps and everything, and it's just a really beautiful plant, and it'd be great to rediscover this in the state. And I think that's my last slide. This was just a humble beauty berry that y'all are probably familiar with, but I found this really nice pink form up on Sugarloaf Mountain in eastern Oklahoma. And there are white forms of the beautyberry out there that some nurseries here in Texas are doing, and definitely room for other ones there. Okay, that's my last slide. I found a little dwarf sable miner here in East Texas, a little population of these, which may actually be a new species. There are some similar dwarfs in Florida. There's someone doing the DNA work on these now, so we'll see, but that's as big as it gets, just these little tiny miniature plants. Oh, I lied, I'm sorry. But yeah, I'll finish up there, and yeah, feel free to keep in touch with me. That's my email there. I'm on Facebook as Adam Black. If you look me up, I'm the only Adam Black, I think, in Navasota. It's basically the one with all the plant photos. It's only plants, nothing else. Well, occasionally I may throw a snake or a fossil or some other natural object in there, but no politics or any personal stuff. It's all plants. So if you're hesitant about Facebook for those reasons, you don't need to worry about that from me. And then Adam Black Plant Nerd on Instagram there. And you can always just follow me through those means and contact me through there as well. But
Well, I've got a couple of questions here for you.
sure.
Here's a comment. It kind of touches on the ranches you were talking about earlier. With all the large ranches being purchased for development, especially in North Texas, do you get calls to survey the areas for native plants, especially the rare ones that may disappear under the bulldozers?
Yeah, well, yeah, I do plant surveys. I and several other folks here, and oftentimes, if I kind of know that some land is being bought up, I'll be proactive. If it's like in a really interesting area ecologically, and I just want to get in there and maybe see what's there that may be lost, that maybe we can salvage, or maybe influence the new landowner to be proud of. Of course, there's always this it's always kind of tricky because different landowners have different ideas as far as rare plants. Some people think that if we find something interesting, that the government's going to come in and take it away from them, or just kind of basically intervene on their privacy, which is really not the case. I mean, we want to work with landowners on that, but yeah, I mean, they're, being that most of Texas is privately owned, it's always challenging, but it's been good though. I think that there's been a lot more people that are becoming more receptive to it, and we're finding ways of just basically changing their attitudes towards some of the treasures that they do have on their land.
Well, that's good. Here we have one other question. Many of these selections appear to be found in limestone areas of the hill country. What is it about alkaline soils that support so many different species?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily that's where only the good stuff is found. I mean, I tried to avoid a lot of the East Texas stuff that I thought might not do as well up in your area. That's not to say that they wouldn't do well. I think we need to trial them more, but I mean, some things from the more acidic soils in deep East Texas are well known to not survive in the more alkaline soils, but other things are adaptable. So I guess I was trying to suggest things from different parts of the state that either there's been enough trialing up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area to know that they do okay in the right situations. But again, that's definitely not to say that some of these East Texas or South Texas or far West Texas things that grow in maybe the igneous soils out there wouldn't do well in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So yeah, I definitely don't want to make it sound like it's only that region that has such a wealth of potential.
But yeah, some of these are worth a try here. So if you can email me your information, hopefully everybody got it down from the slide, but if they didn't, well, we can view it later we have a recording. So I think people can get that information, that maybe they could reach out to you through those venues.
Absolutely.
And I got a couple of compliments here. And very interesting presentation, lovely plant species, an excellent presentation. Thank you. One of our members has property in East Texas, and they'll be on the lookout.
Sounds great.
We appreciate it greatly.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for coming. We'll get on to Abby. We got our business portion now.
You're welcome to stay, Adam, if you like. It was a fantastic presentation. I'm jealous you get to go all over the whole state, let alone the whole country, to source your information. I was very, very informational. Thank you. Now it's time for our dear friend, Jeff Raska. Jeff, I think it's all you.
All right, thank you, Abby. I'm going to be real short. This is going to be. I want to update everybody on what's going on at the county office. There was a candidate sit down this week to AgriLife, to A&M, to interview for the directorship. He went through the local interviews. Seems like they liked him, and if he's hired, then I'll certainly let everybody know we have a director. We hadn't had a director in 3 years, or almost 4 years now. So it'll be nice to get a director in the office. what that means, once they put the county director in, what's happened this week is the governor signed a budget bill, which put extensions budget back up to 100%. They were given 95%, but now they've go ahead given us the other 5%. So they're going to be able to fill staff positions now. So that means that once the director is hired, and I don't know if this one's going to be hired or not, but it looks like it, more than likely. And once they're hired, they'll be put in place, and then they'll start being able to hire agents. And, you know, we're down a 4-H agent. We're down of course, down a horde agent. We're also going to be down our FCH agent, Brittany Martin, who a lot of you worked with if you're wellness volunteer and such, is going to have her baby soon. She'll be out for leave, and then she's going to be transferring to Collin County. We're very proud of Brittany. Brittany will transfer there because she's on a career ladder to a directorship. So to do that, Extension wants them to work different counties. So that's her next step up the career ladder. We're very proud of Brittany. She's been a great addition. We're going to miss her a lot, but we're happy she's got a chance to advance and climb the ladder here with Extension. She'll be gone, so there'll be 3 agents out with that and the other, and the 4-H agent, the FCH agent, and the horde agent. But they'll be possibly by the end of this year, or possibly by fall even, depending on how fast the director gets in or how fast the director is hired. They're going to start putting people in place and start getting the staff built. So there'll be a staff built. That'll transition me out of this position and transfer the new agent into it. I want to let everybody know there will not be a gap in transition where there won't be an AgriLife person here. I will be here. I talked to Dr. Miller yesterday, and I'm certainly going to stay until a new horde agent is going to be hired, even if it extends into next year, depending on what it takes. So I'm not going to just leave the program without anybody in place. So I'll be here. You'll have to listen to me a little bit longer until we get a new agent, and then they'll transition to the new agent. So that's we're excited to get some people in the office. We're excited to get it fully staffed. Being that we're getting back in business now, we need the people in place. You guys have been great in transition this last year. I'm not talking about this last year anymore. We're going forward. So we're back in business. We're going to start opening up. You're going to start looking for presentations and programs. I'm going to start doing a couple series of programs, and I know the Speakers Bureau is already out doing programs, and start looking for them on the Master Gardener, on the association website, and start getting back in the group again, and let's have some fun. Let's get back together. It's been so exciting. When I've seen that people, when we get back together now, everybody's so excited just to be together and just to visit a little bit. It's been a really nice experience. But that's my update, Abby. I just wanted to give you guys an update on what's happening at the county level, but I'm just happy we're going to be back to full staff at the county. And so that's good news, really good news for us. But that's it. That's it today.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it very much. Looking forward to having some people in place. And so that brings us up to the announcements. And I've got a few of those. First one is the Master Gardener's Garden at the Texas Discovery Garden has been added to our list of plant tag enabled gardens. So that's really exciting to have that addition to our plant tag enabled gardens. Cindy Large with the at-home botanist program will have their first team meeting via Zoom on Tuesday, June 29th, this coming Tuesday at 2:00 in the afternoon. Please notify Cindy Large if you wish to attend. They still need some help with some at-home botanist positions. So that's up and coming. And there are going to be 2 intern volunteer days. The first one will be on Saturday, June 26th at Lakewood Elementary School. Project leader Cynthia Jones has invited the interns to a work morning out there from 8 to 10:30. And then the second one will be on Wednesday, June 30th, from 8 to 11. And that will be Harvest Day out at Rowlett Road and Bridge 1. Please remember to bring your COVID forms, either the online version or the paper version. water, hat, and sunscreen. And that does it for the announcements. And Janet, if you're on, I would like to introduce Janet Smith, Program Coordinator for the White Rock Demonstration Garden. She is our garden spotlight today. Thank you, Janet.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, you're great. You're coming
Okay.
in loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay. Let me get back here. My Zoom. Okay, something. Okay, sorry. Oh. Okay, here we go. All right, the White Rock Demonstration Gardens were founded really in 2006, but we planted in 2008. So it's been, next month will mark 13 years. I know that we're not the oldest garden, but we've been around for a while. And for those of you who know that White Rock is a big area, we have two gardens. What I think of as our main gardens is at the Bathhouse Cultural Center that you can get to by taking North Cliff off of Buckner. You know, the east side of White Rock Lake is sectioned off, so you can't drive around it. So this is how you get to the bathhouse, is from North Cliff off Buckner. And then we have a very small garden over at Winfrey Point. And for you Master Gardener old timers, you know that we many times met at the Winfrey Point building, which is up on the top of the hill off Emerald Isle from Garland Road, there by the old Barbeck's restaurant. So those are our two sites. We have what we commonly call the BHPG, is the Bathhouse Pollinator Garden. And this is the one we planted in 2008. It has evolved. It has many of the original plants, but it has a lot of new plants. We were very lucky in the big freeze. We didn't lose much. We had already removed all of our Indian hawthorns, so we didn't have that problem. But like everyone else, I'm sure you've noticed that the plants that survived the freeze just seem to be thriving. And our garden is too. This is our Winfrey Point garden. It's just a small garden here at the historical marker. And CA designed it, and Judy Mayer is basically the one that takes care of it. It's a small garden, you can see. So this year we were happy to have 2 new beds. They did a renovation of the Bathhouse Cultural Center building, and they had asked us about 2 years ago if we would be willing to take on these new beds that were in the plan. And they're 2 semicircular beds that face the lake, and they're at each end of the garden. So as it turned out, thank goodness this coincided with the pandemic, but we were closed off from any of the property of the bathhouse for half of last year. So in early January, they took down the construction fence and we could finally get in and see what was going on. And we immediately started working on our gardens. The first thing we had to do was weed them, which we did as a team, but Judy and Kathy are 2 of our big weeders. Vera's another one. These ladies love to weed, and I say, hallelujah, how lucky can you get? And here we have some community volunteers. I remember one guy is Russell, who is a landscaping designer and installer that lives in the neighborhood that I met years ago when I was working in my yard. So he comes by and he does our muscle work for us, and he did the tilling and helped add the amendments. And then luckily we were slow enough in doing all that that we weren't ready to plant before the big freeze. You know, you look back on life and think, what are your lucky breaks? That was one for us. So right after the freeze, around the 1st of March, we started planting. And Karen Metter designed our new beds. And here we have Susie and Jen, the Pink twins, helping to plant one of the beds. Then the bathhouse provided us with some drip irrigation. And that's, you might wonder, what's all that stuff there in the background behind Susie? That's the drip that we took out to facilitate the tilling and the planting. Then we laid it back down and ran some test runs, made sure we had it at every plant, and then we mulched. And here's our garden. This week I took this picture. Well, actually a couple weeks ago. But anyway, I love this garden because it's about 3.5 to 4.5 feet above ground level. So you get the view of a toddler. It's like lying down in the garden. You see the plants at ground level. And I know many of you are fully able and don't have bad knees or hips or any of that stuff that some of us older people have. And maybe you can get down to this level, but I can't. And so I'd love to walk by these beds and see the ground level view. And here we have our lovely, lo and behold, buddleias that are just blooming like a champ. We have Salvia greggii, autumn sage behind it. And the reason I knew this picture wasn't the one I took this week is because the salvias are kind of, they're past their spring bloom and they're regrouping for their summer bloom. So they're not blooming this week. Here's the other side. It's kind of the yellow garden. We've got a lot of new gold lantana and Jerusalem sage. And that's Cotoneaster in the background, and over in the back right corner behind the plant tag sign is Mexican bush sage. Currently, you can't see both gardens together at once unless you're out on the lake, because when they did the renovation, they did a lot of work. Most of the work was done on the lake side of the building. And frankly, it's been a swamp since then. You know, we've had a lot of rain and the soil level in that area was reduced, so it's not drying up as quickly as usual. So you can't really get a view of the whole length of the building, so unless you're on the water. And back here, we also have our little round garden with our desert willow that we planted 3 years ago, and it's surrounded by autumn sage. And we didn't plant it to be a rain garden, but that's what it's turned out to be. So every time we have a big rain down at the White Rock area, or there's been a big rain to the north that all flows down White Rock Creek, this area floods, and we've seen our desert willow under 3 feet of water, and our autumn sages as well, but they seem to do fine. So our willow isn't blooming as much as I've seen on others this year, and we figure that might be by these flooded times. We're very excited to have a new addition in our garden. Our mother duck and her at least 7 or 9 eggs. We're not sure how many eggs are under her because she hid them so well. For a while we thought somebody had stolen them, but then they appeared again. But she's hiding behind one of our benches, and you can see she blends in very well with the mulch. So she's our new mascot, and we're kind of we're not having a big group come out to the garden. Actually, we hadn't been having a big group anyway, so it didn't matter. But we're trying to be considerate of her and not disturb her. She seems to take it well when we're there. So we'd love for you to come join our team. You know, we are an ornamental garden. We don't grow any edibles except what's eaten by, that are host plants, eaten by caterpillars. It will turn into butterflies. But we meet generally on Tuesday evenings and Friday mornings. That's just because there was no one time when everybody could come. And this time of year, let's face it, we're in the doldrums of summer. What we'll be doing is weeding, deadheading, and trimming back. If you'd like to do those things, we'd love to have you join us. Just let me know. And in the meantime, in case you didn't know, this is National Pollinator Week. So we're just going to finish up with a few pictures of a few of the beautiful butterflies that we've seen in our garden. Any questions? And for those of you that are too new to know, I include this because Sex in the Garden is my signature talk, and people are always talking about that. So I always have to throw in a little, although my talk is about pollination, not about animal reproduction. So any questions?
Joellen, do you see any questions in the chat?
No questions in the chat, but praise for the gardens, the new gardens. Look lovely.
Listen, come out and see the gardens in the back. They're
In the back.
or the lakeside. There's been a big controversy about which is the front and the back of the building, but on the lake side of the building, not the side you see from the parking lot. Okay, thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thank you very much, Janet. Really enjoyed it. Can't wait to get out there and see it. Okay, that brings us to, I think Jessica has a slide for me about our next DMG. Oh, there it is. We're for our July monthly meeting, we're going to be having our first face-to-face. It will be an open house at Lake Cliff Park, which is, the address is 300 East Colorado Boulevard. It's in our list of designated gardens. And we will be having two opportunities. Thursday, July 22nd, there's my slide, from 9 to 1. And then on Saturday, on the 24th, from 9 to 1 also. And of course, as usual, you earn 1 CEU by attending the open house walking tour. And as we get closer to that date, we will have it a little bit better organized as to how we will go about handing out information for the actual walking tour. There will be some docets to help with showing different parts of the garden. And of course, John Ellis will be the one to give us the script and or a video on the how the Lake Cliff Park came into being. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this June meeting, and we'll look forward to seeing people, hopefully face to face, next month. So Jessica, I think that's all I have.
Well, that's great, Abby. Then we're all set for the day. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Joellen.
Thanks, Abby.
You bet. Bye.